NBA trade deadline, the winners, Pelicans, and losers, Kings. Heading into NBA trade deadline day, there was a very real fear that the biggest move of the year had already been made. But while nothing was likely to top the New Orleans Pelicans deal for DeMarcus Cousins, there was still plenty of talk that either the Chicago Bulls Jimmy Butler or the Indiana Pacers Paul George could find their way to a contender before the 3 p.m. ET deadline. Instead, for better or worse, both players remained where they were. It was all rather disappointing. There was, however, plenty of action, as some teams managed to improve themselves over the last few days, while others did the opposite thing. Winners: Cleveland Cavaliers. And it's now official, the Cleveland Cavaliers have won the trade deadline. DJ Gallo was partly joking when he concluded our live trade deadline coverage with that line, but only partly. Butler, George and the New York Knicks Carmelo Anthony stayed with their own teams while Cousins remained in the Western Conference. With no team in the East really making a major move, the Cavaliers' path to the NBA Finals remains just as clear as it did a few days ago. New Orleans Pelicans. Sure, maybe it won't pan out. There are enough question marks surrounding Cousins that it's possible he will end up being a bigger headache than an asset. It's also possible Cousins and Anthony Davis won't make a good fit when it comes down to actually sharing the court. No matter what, however, it feels like there is no possible future where he doesn't end up being more productive than Buddy freaking Hield. Brooklyn Nets in sending off Bojan Bogdanovic and Chris McCulloch to the Washington Wizards for Andrew Nicholson, the immediately waived Marcus Thornton and a lottery-protected first-round pick in 2017, the Nets finally made a deal looking ahead towards the future. While it wasn't super great that they had to absorb Nicholson's contract, that's the price for picking up a desperately needed draft pick. Picking up the Houston Rockets' KJ McDaniels right before the deadline was also a nice, low-risk move. Houston Rockets. The Rockets are one of the few teams that might actually have an actual shot at winning the finals, even if it's not a particularly great one, so picking up Lou Williams from the Lakers for Corey Brewer and a first-round pick might end up paying off. Dallas Mavericks. Have we all forgotten how good Nerlens Noel could be? Well, apparently the Philadelphia 76ers did. Although he's not much of an offensive weapon, he was one of the better defensive bigs in the game and certainly a more useful piece that Jahlil Okafor, the player Philadelphia actually should have been looking to give away. Solid move for the Mavericks. Emojis. This was the year where NBA players realized they could single-handedly create a media storm just by tweeting out an ambiguous emoji or two. The Boston Celtics' Isaiah Thomas, in fact, had turned it into an art form by trade deadline's time. First, he convinced all of Celtics Twitter that a major move was coming by tweeting a pair of eyes. And, as the deadline approached, he noted that time was ticking for his team to make a move which ended up never happening. Toronto Raptors. PJ Tucker from the Phoenix Suns for Jared Sullinger and a few picks? Sure, that's fine. Minnesota Timberwolves. They're winners just for deciding against trading for Derrick Rose. Losers. Sacramento Kings owner Vivek Ranadive thinks Hield has Steph Curry potential. GM Vlade Divac has publicly admitted that he had passed on a better deal involving Cousins, which seems like something one admits only if they're actively trying to get fired. In the past few days, the Kings have made a firm push to establish themselves as one of the most poorly run sports franchises in the country. Jim Buss and Mitch Kupchak. It's been a miserable week for the two of them. First they were fired by Jeannie Buss and essentially replaced by a failed TV host, terrible Twitter user. Then, the Lakers started to look like an actual respectable franchise again the second they were out of the picture. Sending sixth man Lou Williams to the Rockets for Corey Brewer and a first-rounder looks to be a solid move for a team finally dedicating itself to a franchise reboot. Plus, it might turn out that Paul George could be looking at Los Angeles as his final destination. Philadelphia 76ers. First, the 76ers received Diago Splitter from the Atlanta Hawks for Sonny Ilisava. Because they needed yet another center. It's okay because they made room by shipping Nerlens Noel to the Dallas Mavericks for Andrew Bogut, who they are expecting to buy out, along with Justin Anderson and a protected first-round pick, which will most likely end up being 2 second-round draft picks. Yes, Okafor is still on the roster. No, none of this makes any sense. Chicago Bulls. Well, the good news is that Jimmy Butler is still on the team, which would have been enough to keep them in, at the very least, The incomplete column if not the win column. Then, at the literal last minute, Bulls did make a trade. They sent Doug McDermott, Taj Gibson and a second-round pick to the Oklahoma City Thunder for Joffrey Lauvergne, Anthony Morrow, and Cameron Payne. Yes, Chicago sent the pick in this scenario, which puts them solidly in the losers column here, especially if one factors in their failed talks with the Boston Celtics. Denver Nuggets. The Nuggets spent much of the day making a huge offer for Paul George. They ended up with Roy Hibbert. Incomplete. Boston Celtics. The Celtics were unable to make a deal for Paul George or Jimmy Butler, and so will once again sit on their treasure trove of assets. Was this a wise move, considering that they're probably a year away from actually having a legitimate shot at making the finals, or have they squandering their last realistic chance of landing the star player they desperately need? Indiana Pacers. The good news for the Pacers. Paul George remains with the team. The bad news? The current status quo in Indiana is clearly unsustainable and George is apparently all about joining the Lakers either through free agency or a trade.